Hi, good afternoon. My name's Stephanie. I'm a compulsive overeater, grateful to be abstinent today.
Welcome to the Importance of Working All 12 Steps workshop. My co-leader this afternoon is Nancy J. Please help us open the meeting with the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thanks, everybody. Today, we're talking about Step 5. We are going to be referring to several pieces of literature during this time. One is the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions of Overeaters Anonymous. There's a great 12-step workbook for Overeaters Anonymous. Also, there's a pamphlet called Sponsoring Through the 12 Steps. And the Regent Chairs presented at the forum at the 2015 World Service Business Conference a new piece of literature called 12-Stepping a Problem that's really helpful when we're looking at the importance of working on 12 steps. So I'm going to take a few minutes and talk a little bit about myself, let you know that I'm a real compulsive overeater before we get started with Step 5. I came into OA in 86 full force. A few years before that, I'd come in and used it as a diet club, lost about 80 pounds. I'm someone who was fat her whole life. I came from a family where there was an alcoholic father, and I was the oldest of 6 kids. We moved very often. And like I said, I was a fat kid that never felt like she fit in very well. But I returned to OA in 1986 weighing about 250 pounds, and I had been blessed with the gift of desperation. Sometimes I use that as an acronym for God because that really helped me be willing to do what was necessary to work the 12 steps. Before we get started with Step 5, what I'd like to do, since this workshop is about focusing on the importance of all 12 steps, is to just kind of step you through how I got to Step 5 the first time. As I said, I came in and I was really desperate. I weighed 250 pounds, and I just couldn't seem to put down the food. I had come up with a food plan when I was in OA before, and I couldn't stick to it. You know, I really thought the magic was in the food plan, and I'm one of those people who firmly believes that I need to put the food down before I can get my head cleared enough to work the steps. But if I don't work the steps, if it's just a diet, I'm doomed to go back out and eat, and that's what was happening for me. I was trying to follow that food plan and just could not do it. You know, Step 1 talks about we admitted we were powerless over food, and that wasn't too hard for me to see when I came in 86 because I weighed 250 pounds, and I was just like a snowball gathering momentum, just gaining weight faster and faster and faster and faster, and just no end in sight. But that second part, you know, that our lives had become unmanageable, I had a lot of trouble seeing that until I put down the food. I thought I was a perfectly lovely fat lady. I did not have any sense of ways that I had harmed myself or other folks by the character defects that I was later to discover. The food convinced me I was powerless. I didn't have any trouble with that. And then when I put the food down, the disease convinced me that my life was unmanageable. So that brought me to Step 2. Step 1 is the honesty step. It was important for me to be honest about what I really did with the food, and that allowed me to move through Step 1. Then in Step 2, after I found out what the problem was, then I was looking for the solution, and that was, since I was powerless, I needed to find a power, and I needed to find a power greater than me, because my best willpower, my best efforts, all my brain power, everything I tried had not worked, at least not worked long term. And then the second part of that is that this power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Well, I had trouble seeing that I was really insane until someone explained to me that insanity was doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And I could see that in myself, especially with the food. I would lose a little weight and think everything was great and think that I could go back and eat one of my foods that was a trigger food, and I just never could. I had tried God before. It's one of those people I get in some desperate state and I'd say, oh God, please help me, please help me, please help me. I didn't have any kind of a personal relationship with God, but what I found, where I found the hope, was not in a personal God, but it was in the meetings where I saw the power that you guys had when you worked the steps. I saw the power that you guys had when you put the food down. I saw the power in the rooms, and so that gave me the hope. I had the problem, now I had the solution, and now I was going to have to figure out how to implement it. And that brought me to step 3, which is made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. And a good old me, I thought, well, I got to figure out who God is before I can do this because, who knows what God will want me to do. He might want me to be a missionary in Africa, and I don't want to do that. Or worse yet, he might want me to be a door-to-door Bible salesman. And my sponsor said, no, you don't have to do that. She said, this is about turning your will, which is your thought, and your life, which is your actions, over to God. And she said, the way that I recommend that you implement that is that you take step 4. So it wasn't this big whoop. I mean, it is important for me to move forward through the steps, but it wasn't like this great ethereal thing where I had to figure out what God was and was I really on board with him and did he like me and all that kind of stuff. It was that I had made the decision, and the way that I implemented it was I did my step 4. And my sponsor encouraged me, and the way that she encouraged me was she said, if you don't take that 4th step, it's really likely that you're going to go back out and eat again. By the time I got to step 4, I'd probably been abstinent for 3 or 4 months, and I'd probably lost 30, 40, 50 pounds. I can't remember exactly. It was a long time ago, and I'm old. That kind of encouragement, that sort of do it or die, that kind of realization that this was a life and death mission that I was on. It wasn't just, I'd like to be on a diet because I'd like to lose a little weight. By this time, I'd really come to the place where I saw that I needed a lot of help. And that 4th step made that even more apparent. I love this inventorying that we learn to do in step 4 and that we continue to practice in step 10. It's something that I never did before. I always thought that what I thought was the right thing, and it never occurred to me that it was not. If I thought it was right. I had a pretty good education. I was intellectually arrogant, I guess you might say, and so I thought that if I thought it and believed it, it was right, and if I just spent enough time with you, I could convince you. Step 4 was very fear-evoking for me. It says, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. I did the best I could, and that's really all that's required. I've probably done a dozen 4 steps, and each time it's more thorough and it's more fearless because I'm able to be more thorough and more fearless. And that first one, I was filled with fear. It was painful to me to see some of the true things about myself. I wanted to do it perfectly, and I was the queen of procrastination. One of the things that my sponsor lovingly did for me was that she suggested that I pray before I write. She insisted that it be in writing, and that I do it consistently every day, that I spend 15 minutes working on it. Even if I didn't put the pen to the paper, just set 15 minutes aside every day and think about it. And there came a point after, I'd worked on it probably for 3 or 4 months, where she said, we're just going to draw this to an end, and in a couple of weeks I want you to finish up what you're doing, and we're going to go ahead and do the 5th step. I'm grateful that she did that because I could still be working on that same 4th step. Maybe not realistically, but I certainly was headed in that direction, and she was very good about that. So that brings us to step 5. What I'm going to do is go back to the literature again and kind of give more specifics on places that step 5 is mentioned in our OA literature. In the big book, chapter 6 is Into Action, and pages 72 through 75 really discuss this. This book was written in 1939, and when I came in 86, that was really what was available to do a 4th step with at that time. The OA 12 and 12 was not in place. I think the OA 12 came into being in 1990, and it was a few years after that when the second 12 came into that. But the OA 12 and 12, now we have that, and it has beautiful information on the 5th step in pages 45 through 52. And then again in step 12, it reviews all the principles of the steps and goes into detail about step 4 and 5. Our 12-step workbook for Overeaters Anonymous has some good questions on page 31 to 37. Sponsoring through the 12 steps, that's a pamphlet that I've gotten more familiar with in the last few years. I really love the questions at the end of that segment. They're on page, I think, 11 and 12. They are really great questions to go through as I'm reviewing the work that I've done in my fifth step. The fifth step has two parts. One is the admitting to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And the second part that for me was more subtle was to sit down and to have an hour afterwards to review the first 5 steps, the first 5 principles, I think they call it in the big book. And so those questions are really great for reflection when I'm spending that hour by myself. And there's also, as I said, that new 12-stepping problem. That's on the OA website if you want to take a look at that. It's really a great way to, for example, if it's driving you nuts that your husband snores. Something as simple as that, you can work the 12 steps on. It's really a great thing. So step 5 was really an action step for me. It made me put the pen to the paper. What this was about was who, what, where, when, how, and why. So the who. I needed to admit the exact nature of my wrongs to God. He already knew them, but I needed to get honest with myself through God. And I needed to share with another human being. What I found was that I was pretty incapable of being completely honest with myself alone, that I could rationalize, that I could defend, I could blame, and that when I was sharing with someone else, they could reflect back to me what I was saying, or they could share incidents in their own life that would help me see the truth of my situation. Some of the literature that we're talking about today talks about the importance of finding someone who's safe. For me, that's really important, someone that's absolutely trustworthy, someone who will respect my privacy, who's a good listener, who's not going to try to fix me, who will keep my secrets safe. What happened for me the first time I did my fifth step with a sponsor was I was still in a lot of fear. I picked my sponsor because that's what everybody did. Because I was still in so much fear, I really hadn't gotten to that fearless place, was that I misdirected. I'll give you, for instance, one of the things that I spent a long amount of time talking about was stealing pen and pencils from the hospital where I worked. And I spent maybe 15 or 30 seconds talking about an abortion I had. And what happened for me was, honestly, I was pretty okay with taking the pens and pencils. I could see that, the exact nature was I stole, but other people did it. And so I really didn't feel horrible about that. Having an abortion, I felt terrible about, and I could not address that because I was in so much fear. But the good news was I didn't lie. I mentioned it in brief form. And later, when I was able to go back and do another 4-step, I was able to do more work. And over the years that I've been in OA, I've been able to get a lot of relief from that. One of the most wonderful things that happened for me in that regard was that I was taking someone else's fifth step. In the town that I live in, we had a treatment center back in that day and age, and there was a lady who beat her children, and I was able to share about having the abortion, and we both had a good cry and asked God to relieve us of our pain and forgive us. And it was very powerful. I could see how something that I did that seemed so wrong to me had been useful to someone else. And to me, that's one of the most powerful things about how this all works, is that God has his hand in all of this. It talks about, what are we going to do? We're going to admit the exact nature of our wrong. It's interesting that it uses the word wrong. It doesn't say wrongs. It says wrong in the big book. And what that has come to mean to me is what it is that gets between me and God. And for me, that's the self, the ego, the selfishness, the me part that gets between me and God. It's demonstrated in a lot of different ways. But that, to me, is the essence, the exact nature of where I'm off the beam, what separates me from God. There's a thing in the big book that talks about the person who's sharing their fifth step. It says, he is under considerable fear and tension that makes for more drinking. So if I didn't continue to do the work, for example, on that abortion, that my fear and my tension and my anxiety would have led me back to eating. I just feel certain of that. Thank God I had enough recovery, little though it was, to keep me in the program, to keep me working on doing the steps. I'm grateful that I was able to do just a little bit to get started down that road. Another part of the what, as we discussed earlier, was that hour that I take afterwards to review it. And that's really important for me to see where I'm off the beam, to see things that I have not completed. As I said, I was in a lot of fear. So even though I could see that I hadn't really done a very thorough job on that part of my inventory, I was not ready or willing to revisit it at that point. But it was in the back of my brain. There's a question that I've heard. It's, what is my integrity worth to me? And I had to begin to value myself enough that my integrity had some value. There's a place in the Big Book where it says, we must be entirely honest with someone, entirely honest with someone, if we expect to live long and happily in this world. And, you know, what happened for me was after I did that fifth step with my sponsor, I didn't feel any relief. In fact, I felt worse, and my thought was to blame my sponsor. That thing about I'm as sick as my secrets, and I still had secrets, and I was still sick. One of the things they talk about in terms of where is how am I to do this? It suggests face-to-face if possible, but today with all the technology, if my sponsor does not live nearby or I'm not able to visit her, these kinds of fifth steps can be done on the phone or with Skype. The important thing is that I have privacy so that I feel safe and so that I do no harm. You know, if I'm doing a fifth step and my husband is involved, there are things that I don't want to say while he's here, so maybe a Skype is not the best option if he's here. Maybe I need to go to a safe place to do that kind of sharing. Then we look at when. When do I do this? It talks about immediately after the fourth step, because I don't want to sit mired down in that garbage. I want to offload it as soon as possible. The how, you know, how did I do this? I picked a partner, and in all cases it has been my sponsor. And the way I've been guided to do is that I kneel and I say a prayer, usually the third step prayer, and I ask God to guide me. It talks about in the Big Book, we pocket our pride and we go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. That prayer helps me do that. It helps me set aside my self-centeredness so I'm able to do that. And again, when I'm in that quiet time afterwards, when I have the hour alone, I practice that prayer that they talk about in the Big Book. You know, we thank God from the bottom of my heart so we know him better and ask him if we've omitted anything. And what I've been instructed to do is review the first 5 steps and with an eye towards finishing up the other steps. And what I have done in the past is made 3 lists. One was a list of my character defects. Those are the things I'm going to need to pray for in 6 and 7. And the folks that I've harmed, and that's for my step 8. And then people I still resent, and that's for the forgiveness prayers that I need to do work on in step 8. So why do I do this? I don't know if any of you get Lifeline, but there was a great article in this last Lifeline about why step 5 is necessary. If you haven't read it, it's really a great article. It talks about in the Big Book, if we skip this step, we may not overcome drinking. That's the best reason of all. I'm going to go back out. I'm going to lose everything that I have if I go back out and use. It also says, but they have not learned enough of the humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find necessary until we've told someone else all of their life story. Every time I read this, I just think back about that first inventory, and I think how blessed I was that I didn't have to go back out. And so one of the reasons is that if I don't, I'm doomed to go back to the food. But another thing is the promises. In the Big Book, there's lots of promises listed. On page 75, it says, once we've taken the step withholding nothing, we are delighted. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Our fears fall from us. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We begin to have a spiritual experience. And this is really where I began to feel that connectedness with God. You know, it wasn't that he didn't know this stuff, but I think my willingness to be as forthright as I was able to lay it at his feet was really important to me. And then another one of the promises of the feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. You know, that sense that I'm on the beam and they say we feel we're on the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. That's it, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. And if I've omitted something or if I've short-shrifted myself, I don't get those feelings. I learned that by trial and error. You know, the first inventory taught me that lesson real strongly. Before I close my part, I want to share readings from our literature. One is part of the invitation to you. It says, can we guarantee you this recovery? The answer is simple. If you will honestly face the truth about yourself and the illness, if you'll keep coming back to meetings to talk and listen to other recovering compulsive overeaters, if you will read our literature and that of Alcoholics Anonymous with an open mind, and most important, if you are willing to rely on a power greater than yourself for direction in your life, and to take the 12 steps to the best of your ability, we believe you can indeed join the ranks of those who recover. Wow, what an awesome guarantee. And the last part I'd like to read to you is from Step 12, page 104 in the OA 12 and 12. And it says, in Steps 4 and 5, we learn courage and integrity as we face the truth about our defects of character. Applying these principles in all our affairs means that we are no longer ruled by fear of admitting our mistakes. We have the integrity to show the world our true selves. No longer needing to appear to the world as perfect people, we can live more fully, having the courage to face up to our mistakes and test our strengths in the challenges of life. Wow, some pretty awesome stuff that comes out of Step 5, don't you think? And that's the conclusion of my part. Before we move on to Nancy, I've got a couple of announcements. The way that this is going to run is I'll have a couple of announcements, and Nancy's going to share, and then we have 3 or 4 questions we'd like to share with you. And then you'll have an opportunity to share about the questions or your experience with Step 5. This workshop is being recorded and will be posted on the OA podcast page as well as other podcast feeds like iTunes. If you speak, it's considered implied consent to have your voice and your share recorded and posted. To preserve your anonymity, please use only your first name or a fictitious name when you share. In accordance with traditions 6 and 10, please refer only to OA-approved literature when you share. According to our 7th tradition, we are self-supporting through our own contributions. Even though this is a virtual meeting or workshop, we still have expenses for the website and uploading the podcast. Please use special workshop meeting number 82278 when making your contributions. You can go to www.oa.org and click on contributions, or you may send your contributions to the World Service Business Office at P.O. Box 44020, Rio Rancho, New Mexico, 87174. Thank you for helping us carry the message. If you have a question about the address, it's on most any piece of OA literature. And now, if you would, please help me welcome Nancy J., who's our second speaker.
Hi, my name's Nancy, and I'm a very gratefully recovering compulsive eater. I consider it a privilege to be part of this workshop. Just to qualify a little bit, I came into OA in the northern suburbs of Detroit, Michigan, September 28, 1973. I grabbed hold of OA right away and was given the gift of my best friend, who was also another compulsive eater, and she took me to my first meeting. By the grace of God and the fellowship, I am maintaining a weight loss of about 150 pounds. And things have changed. You know, I'm old as well, and I have gone through the medication thing that's put weight on me. I've also gone through some of life's changes that have added it, but somehow or another it always comes back to where as long as I stay abstinent, and that's what my sponsor tells me today. You got one job, Nancy, and that's to stay abstinent, and God will take care of the rest. When I got there to my first meeting, it was a step meeting. We did not have any hardbound literature in OA in those days. OA was still reasonably new. And so we were encouraged to read and follow, as Stephanie had mentioned, the AA 12 Steps and 12 Traditions and the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so in those days, for our own private reading, we could change alcohol to food and alcoholic to compulsive eater, and the shoes fit perfectly. And so that's what I kind of grew up and cut my teeth on, no pun intended. So a lot of the things that I do today are things that I have learned at that time. I learned, when I got to my first meeting, it didn't take long before I heard people talking about the dreaded Step 4 and 5. And actually the first night that I went, they were on Step 8. And I just kind of wondered what kind of a cult I had gotten into, because they're talking about making a list of all the people they had harmed. And I thought, there is no way I've harmed anybody but myself. At over 325 pounds, I ate too much, I drank too much, I smoked too much, and I had spent over 20 years on amphetamine diet pills. I knew the caloric value of every food known to humankind and had been on way too many scales to make myself comfortable. And I was a yo-yo dieter. I could go on diets and lose weight. When I would get down to where I wanted to be, I would just say, I'd see myself in a reflection someplace, and I'd say, gee, I look good. I feel good. I'm never going to do that again. And then about a year later, I would be back up to where I had begun my diet and even a little more. And so I would start on that journey again in the whole business. And that is one reason why I always identify as a grateful recovering compulsive eater, because OA put an end to that. And the way it did was through the 12 steps and the 12 traditions. That's why I believe that the most important thing that we can do in our lives when we get to OA is to get into the 12 steps and the 12 traditions, because that's what is going to save us. It's not going to be the latest diet du jour. For me, it is not going to be hanging out with the right people or the wrong people. It's not going to be any outside influences as far as what to eat or what to drink. I've long believed that when I first got to OA, it was about the food until it was not about the food. And that's what the steps do for me. I always go back. If I'm having a difficulty, I say, what step am I working on this? And how can I do this? I have always had a sponsor. They told me the first night I was at meeting that there were 3 things they recommended. Number 1 was that I got abstinent, that I got a sponsor, and that I worked the steps. And I thought it was really strange that they didn't indicate that it was anything about a diet. There were no scales present, and I just didn't realize that it wasn't about the food. But they did have a couple food plans that if we had none other that we would rather use, and they suggested that we take them to our doctors and get our doctor's approval. And that's what I did. I went with my best friend, as I told you. So when we got there, as I said, we were on step 8, and by the time I had gone through 8 through 12 and then back around to steps 4 and 5, I had heard enough people sitting in my meetings, and the meetings were very small then in the Detroit area. We only had 2 meetings in the greater Detroit area, and they were both very small, like 7 or 8 people. I think there were 7 my first night, and that was counting me. But they started talking about this notorious 4th and 5th steps. So I kind of got scared too, and I thought, oh, this is where they're going to bring in the doctrine, and they're going to start trying to get me. So I had kind of firmly set my jaw in place and said, well, you're not going to fool me. I've been down this rodeo before. I was really quite surprised. By the time that we got back around to step 4, I had heard more people share about some of their foibles and some of their fears and some of their anxieties, and we weren't even on that 4th step. So by the time I got to the 4th step, I was pretty much acclimated that it wasn't going to be something where an arm or a leg was going to fall off, or that I was going to turn green, or anything like that was going to be disastrous to help me. On the contrary, I found a room of people who were there, mostly women, because men hadn't started coming to OA at that point in time in our area. And they were kind, and they were considerate, and they didn't try to make themselves feel better than me just because I was a newcomer. They were encouraging, and I had never had that happen. I had grown up in the home of a raging alcoholic. There was a lot of violence in our home, and I remember being very young, and when the wrath of my dad fell heaviest on my back and he passed out in another room, I would go to the kitchen looking for comfort foods. Sometimes I would be sobbing so hard that there would be a knot in my throat, but I was always able to get those foods down. Some of the things that my dad did were things that daddy shouldn't teach their little girls about, and I carried that around as a heavy, heavy burden. And so when I got to step 4 and subsequently to 5, I was scared. I was scared that I was not going to measure up. I was scared that I wasn't going to be worthy to go to OA, that someone was going to find a flaw in my character that was going to make me so bad that they were just going to dismiss anything that I had to say. The saving grace for me was that I had got my best friend, whom I had seen OA working in her life, and I had seen in a tremendous weight loss, and it was the first time that I had ever known her to be thin in our entire lives. And I had seen her work OA and how it had changed her character and how she was no longer crass or judgmental or whatever. And I thought, wow, there's something that's happened in this woman that I don't know anything about. And I had asked her to be my sponsor the first night, and so she kind of led me through the minefield and all the explosions that would happen in life. And she kept saying to me, you need to learn to live life on life's terms. And part of that is coming to deal with who you really are. We went through these steps and we got there, and I figured she was the one and only person in the whole world that I could trust. I was involved in everything you can imagine because I found out through this inventory process I was the great escapist. And I would escape by being a human doing instead of a human being. And I was involved in my church and in my community and the Girl Scouts and the PTA and everything that came along. But there was something that happened to her that she accepted me just the way I was, and so did the other people in the meeting. And when this 4th step came up, I wasn't faced with a great deal of fear. And we went through the 4th step, and she taught me things the little things like, you know what, you're not going to get every defect the first time through. She also taught me what the 3 parts of it are, is that you start out and you take baby steps, and you realize that this is going to be, as long as you're alive, it's going to be an unending process. And that every time you do an inventory, you're going to find something that may surprise you, because you're not going to be in the same space that you were when you started in OA. And she said, just give yourself a break. And so I went through my first inventory with her, and all I got was kindness and understanding. And I think there was a soothing quality and a great deal of relief in knowing that I could share this with my friend, who had become my sponsor, and not be judged or criticized or condemned about what I should or should have not done as I was growing up. And so at any rate, it gave me a sense of hope to have completed that inventory, even though I had entered it with a little bit of reticence. 2.5 years into the program, I had lost the weight that I needed to lose, and at a Thanksgiving dinner, I ate something that wasn't on my food plan, and I immediately built walls. Those walls that I built were a prison that I walked into, that there was no way out, and I was out on a 5-month relapse. During that time, my sponsor had left program too, and she had never returned, and to this day, I don't think that she's returned. I knew that OA was the only way out. I ran into another woman in our meeting who had taken OA from Texas to Michigan and started the meetings in Michigan, and I ran into her in the supermarket, and I immediately asked her if the meetings were still going on in her house, because I was so embarrassed and I was so full of guilt and shame and fear. And she said no, but she recommended another meeting. And I asked her if she would be my sponsor, because Mary Jane had left the program, and Carolyn said yes, she would. But she said on 2 conditions. The first condition was that I had to be as honest as I possibly could, and the second condition was that I had to work the steps instead of the food. And so consequently, I agreed to that, and I also learned then and there that I don't fool anybody. I thought that I was working the steps to the best of my ability, but I was still in the food, and it probably took that relapse to show me how to get out of working the food and get into the steps. And the next 13 years until I moved to California, she was my sponsor. And she taught me all the different kinds of ways to do an inventory. Most of them were out of the big book, and by that time we had the OA 12 and 12. And though I learned the steps out of the big book and the AA 12 and 12, I got to tell you, I think that our OA 12 and 12 is the finest piece of literature that has ever created for the compulsive eater, because there are subtle differences that I've seen in my recovery in OA as opposed to what we learned in AA. Although the same principles are involved, and so I can learn and work from the same principles, my first reaction is to go back to the OA 12 and 12. Everything I need to know is in that book. We also have some great pamphlets. She taught me how to do an inventory in different ways. At one point in my life, I got confused. I said, this isn't working. It's not working to sit down with pen in hand and write down my defects on the paper. I said, I need to know something else. And she said, okay, I'm going to give you an aid, an assist that has worked for me. She took me into her bathroom, and we were both facing the mirror. And she said, I want you to tell me what you see when you look in the mirror. And I looked in the mirror, and she said, tell me a physical characteristic that you see. What's it? And I said, well, I have red hair. And she said, that's good. What's another physical thing that you see? I said, I have freckles. And she said, that's good. You're on a roll. She said, what else? And I said, well, I have green eyes. She said, good. Now, let's change direction here. And I want you to tell me what you see about your emotional being. And the first thing that came out of my mouth is I said, I'm angry. And this had never come up on any of the inventories prior to that time. I said, I see anger. She said, that's good. Do you see anything else? Just your emotional self. And I said, I'm fearful. She said, that's good. And now can you give me a third one? And I said, I'm a people pleaser, and I use food to escape. She said, I think you're on the right track. And so that helped me get over that speed bump that is now called by my sponsor, that speed bump of getting a writer's or an inventory cramp, and you can't go on further. And so it was just another technique as far as taking an inventory. And then when I left her house that day, I went home and I was able to then write about these things that I had identified. There are some things, just like the physical inventory, there were some things that I could change and some things that I couldn't. But it embarked me on a lifetime career, 41 years. And I'm also in another 12-step program, and I think between the two programs, I have done maybe 100 inventories, and I always find something that I either forgot or that's something that's new, because I'm learning to live life on life's terms. And I have found that there's a great deal of joy because I've been able to stay abstinent in taking those inventories. As Stephanie mentioned, it says that, if we skip this step, it's likely that I'm going to compulsively eat again, and I won't know when or where or how it's going to happen, but it's going to blindside me because my disease is cunning, baffling, and powerful. The last thing I want to share with you is that on page 72 of the big book and in the steps 11 and 12 of the OA 12 and 12, there's a word that has been very key to my recovery, and it's called practice. And in the big book, it says, in actual practice, we usually find a solitary self-appraisal insufficient. Many of us thought it necessary to go much further. We will be more reconciled to discussing ourselves with another person when we see good reasons why we should do so. Then it lists some of the reasons. In steps 11 and 12 in the Overeaters Anonymous 12 and 12 book, the word practice is mentioned in some form over 22 times. And so I have to practice the principles of this program that I find in the steps. And I have to practice them every single day. And if I don't practice them, I'm going to fall back into that same old rut that I did before. I'm going to be fearful, and I'm going to be angry. and I'm going to want to escape in everything, and I'll be setting myself up for a complete failure because I won't be able to do those things, and all I will want to do is eat. Thank you so much for letting me share.
Nancy and I have come up with 3 or 4 questions here that we think might be helpful in terms of thinking about step 5. You may want to journal on this or contemplate or talk to your sponsor about these questions. I'll read them and then I'll repeat them in case you want to write them down. We've had several requests to make sure that we give these questions slowly. First question is, what is your worst fear about step 5? What is your worst fear about step 5? Number 2, how do I pick someone to share my 5th step with? What do I want in this person? How do I pick someone to share my 5th step with? What do I want in this person? Question 3, what are the benefits of doing this step? What is my integrity worth to me? What are the benefits of doing this step? What is my integrity worth to me? And the last question, do I understand the difference between humility and humiliation? Do I understand the difference between humility and humiliation? As we move forward, I just want to give you a reminder that this workshop is being recorded and will be posted on the OA website podcast page. If you speak, it's considered implied consent to have your voice and your share recorded and posted. To preserve your anonymity, please use only your first name or a fictitious name when you share. And in accordance with Traditions 6 and 10, please refer only to OA-approved literature when you share. We are open for sharing.
Hi, this is Natalie compulsive over.
Go ahead, Natalie.
Thank you very much, both of you, for your share. I have done a 5th step 2 or 3 times, and, my experience in my life was that I was one of those people that didn't have any trouble telling everything about myself. So doing my 5th step didn't seem scary to me. I'd done a lot of self-help workshops and stuff like that. There was something that happened doing the 4th step and then the 5th step that was, I guess when I had done the work before, I kind of lied about stuff. And someone mentioned, I think, shared about, telling the truth about ourselves is very difficult. And I was definitely one of those people where telling the truth about myself, the whole truth, my part of it, which is what we do in the 4th step. We identify our part in it. My sharing my part of it, that's the part I had never done before. So saying that out loud to someone else, now it was out in the open. Now I couldn't just pretend that I had never said it before and it wasn't true. It was liberating to do that because I didn't have to carry that secret around anymore. It's like you said, it's not like God doesn't know, but I could pretend when I hadn't told someone else, I could walk around pretending that God didn't know, that I didn't know. And now, having done my 5th step, I could no longer pretend that this wasn't my makeup. That was liberating because then I could also see the judgments I was carrying against myself. The desire to have done it differently, but not having been able to, but having still beaten myself up, like I really need to have done this differently. Why didn't I do it differently? And all of that went along with keeping it a secret got released, when I did my 5th step. So I love doing the 5th step, and I still do a 5th step with my sponsor whenever I find something that I have. I do my inventory at night, and then I talk to her about what I found, because if I don't tell someone else, as it has been said, I know I will go out into the food. I will go out for sure. And then the last thing I'll share is thank you so much for the question, do I understand the difference between humility and humiliation? I certainly didn't understand that difference when I was prior to program, and I feel like I do understand that difference now. So thank you very much, and happy Mother's Day to any of us who are mothers.
Hi, it's Gloria. I'd like to share. First of all, I'd just like to thank both of you. This has been really wonderful, and especially for giving up a Mother's Day afternoon. Nancy, thank you for that new method of doing a 4th step. I'd like to share something that was suggested to me as an additional method of doing a fourth step, and that is basically to list 10 things that I really value in life and then describe how my disease has prevented me from realizing those values or sticking to them or achieving them. I mean, for example, I always said that one of the great things I valued in life was friendship. But in doing a fourth step that way, I had to examine, did I really practice that? And the answer was no, because I didn't do the kinds of things that you do when you respect a friendship or you want to keep a friendship, mostly because of my disease. I could never keep in touch with anyone because I didn't want them to see how fat I had got. And then resentments came out of that and harm, the list of people that I had harmed. I'll just close with saying that the fourth step I did with my sponsor was absolutely wonderful because I was so afraid of admitting all these things that I considered absolutely terrible. And she was very gentle. We had dinner at her house. There were candles. I wasn't so good at focusing on my part, and she helped me through that. And then at the end of it all, I truly felt like it didn't make any difference to her, all these things I had admitted. She loved me. Anyway, she loved me the same as before I did the fifth step. And that was a wonderful experience that kept me going in OA. Thank you again for the workshop.
Rosalie, I'm a compulsive overeater.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Rosalie, I just wanted to talk a little bit about using the OA 12 and 12 as the basis for doing a fourth and fifth step. I found that's the most complete inventory I have seen in all of the years I've been in OA. I've also combined that inventory with the discussion in the big book as well as the AA 12 and 12 and found it really gives me a full picture of who I am as a compulsive overeater trying to stay in recovery. I also want to give a shout-out to sponsors. My first sponsor, when I first did my inventory, sat across the table from me, and she said she could see how fearful I was about revealing the secrets. And she told me, she said, I'm not here to condemn you. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to listen. Really what she did for me was she became the mirror in which I could see myself as who I really was, instead of hiding behind this fake inventory or this fake identity that I had built up in my mind. And I'm so grateful for that because it formed the basis for the way I sponsor now and has helped me understand myself better. It has helped me accept that I'm no better or worse than the people around me, that when I sit in the rooms of OA, I'm just another compulsive overeater trying to be in recovery one day at a time. And for that first sponsor, I am so grateful. She taught me and she modeled for me the lessons that I've learned in OA. Thank you so much for sharing this on Mother's Day. Thank you.
Hi, this is Josephine, compulsive overeater. I just wanted to also say thank you. This was really well done. I appreciate everything both of you said, and just to share a little bit about my first fifth step, which I've just completed the 12 steps for the first time. It was 3 months ago, so I'm very new to the program. But when my sponsor and I were on step 5, I think what stood out most, what was said here, is the feeling of love and acceptance, being able to just say all of that and still experience love and acceptance. And I'm a Catholic nun, a sister, so I was doubly petrified, like, oh, Lord, I'm sitting here in this habit, and I'm just laying it out. How is this lady going to respond? But she was so good to me. I don't know, anytime I've ever kind of had something like that with a spiritual director where I'm sharing openly, when I come to the talk, and it was the same with the sponsor, when I came there with my inventory to share with her, it was not the thing that I was going to thought would be hardest to say wasn't what it was hardest to say. I was always surprised by what was hardest to say. And during our conversation, she asked me a question. I told her something horrible that I did to my best friend, and it was I wanted to hurt her. And at the time, I knew I wanted to hurt her, and I was remembering that and admitting that to my sponsor. She asked me, why did you do that? And I used to think it's because I'm a horrible person. But in that moment, I realized, I was wrong to do that. It was a messed up thing. But I was also afraid of not being loved. And I think that's why I was doing what I was doing to my friend. It was from fear. It was the fear of rejection. And so I think what the fifth step really did for me was just to come to realize that I'm just like everybody else. We all want to be loved. We all want to be accepted. We all want to have that sense of okayness in life. So, yeah, it was great. And I think it is a perfect day to do this on Mother's Day because I think a mother's heart can be a great source of the kind of love and acceptance that we experience in Step 5 or hope to experience in Step 5. So I'm grateful. I think this is timely and really well done. So thank you.
Thank you all for being here today. I want to let you know that the opinions expressed here today are those of individual OA members and do not represent OA as a whole. Thank you all. Have a wonderful Mother's Day. See you next month for Step 6.